Hello and welcome back to Bunny Hoof Studio. Halloween is approaching and my Sylvanian cozy cottage needs some cakes, snacks and pumpkins for their upcoming gathering, and I want them to look as delicious and Halloweeny as possible. The pumpkins, which I'll start with, I actually started making them a year ago, before I was uploading anything yet, so these first clips are from last October when I was still experimenting with filming. I finished them up this month, along with the rest of the cakes and treats you're about to see me make. So I roll out the size of clay I want for my first pumpkin, and then use the smooth rounded shape of one of my sculpting tools to create grooves around it, to give it that classic pumpkin shape. I'll show some close-up shots of me doing this with the next pumpkin so you can see a bit better. It's been really interesting seeing the quick and easy ways people have learnt to make things from clay. I feel like I naturally always choose the most time-consuming approach, so I often check out how other people are making things to see if they've discovered a much better way, and usually they have. I'm using air drying clay, which can get quite messy, but I find it really fun to work with actually. It definitely looks more challenging than polymer clay though. I like that with polymer clay your hands stay nice and clean in the process, and surfaces seem to stay nice and smooth, but I wonder if I would still prefer actually sculpting using air dry. One day I think I will give polymer a try, but we'll see. Adding the curved stalk for the pumpkin was definitely quite tricky with air dry. I find that the clay cracks quite easily when it's bent. I think for future foods with stalks I'll use some wire to reinforce it perhaps. I decided to make this one bigger than the last, and I love how the curved stalk turned out on this one. Finally, I wanted to try making a butternut squash. I roll out the clay, making sure it has the classic curved shape to it. I add its little stalk, and I already have 3 pumpkins ready to be dried and painted. I added Freya in here so you can see the scale next to a Sylvanian. We are back in this present October now, and I have been wanting to create a little ghost for the Cosy Cottage Bakery for so long. I thought that Halloween would be the perfect time to do this. I use foil for the centre of the ghost. This really helps to save clay, and also helps with the structure and the drying time of the clay. I'm trying out Das air dry clay for the first time, as I actually want to see if this might be a better and stronger option for my art dolls that I make. I really need to buy a tiny rolling pin for my clay, but today I'm using a large paintbrush handle instead. I then cut a circle from the clay and gently drape it over the foil to create the ghost shape. I carefully shape each fold of what's meant to be the fabric around the foil. I find using a paintbrush handle helps as well. I then wet the surface to help smooth it out. In hindsight, I actually think I should have spent a bit longer smoothing out this particular clay with tools and my fingers, as I found this to be quite textured even after sanding. It seems to have more visible paper fibres than the other clay I was using, but at the same time it does also feel really nice and strong, so I'm still a little torn on if this clay might be better for dolls or not. I got these little circular tools recently, and they are perfect for shaping the eyes of my little ghost. Now that they are dry, I'm going to sand them so that the head is smoother and the bumps disappear. Sanding the folds of the fabric was quite tricky though, which is why I think I should have spent longer smoothing it while it was wet. I use a harsh paper at first, and then switch to a fine grain once I'm happy with the surface. Once I'm done with this process, I seal up the bottom of the figure to hide the foil and to make a nice surface for my ghost to sit on. I use some leftover clay for this. I really don't remember the brand name, but if you live in Portugal, you can find it in any loja de chinês. I find it smooths out really nicely actually when it's sanded, but it doesn't feel quite as nice to work with as the Das clay and feels a bit weaker as well. Next I want to make some tiny cups of coffee that will feature some spooky latte art once I get to painting them. I use the end of a paintbrush to make the first cup, cutting around the circumference to make a nice clean edge. I'd never actually done this before, so I was a little uncertain at first, not knowing how much clay to use or how thick to make the edges of my cup. Making the handle was really fiddly this small, but I started to get the hang of it after a few attempts. Similarly to the stalks of the pumpkins, I find when you bend air dry clay it just cracks very easily, especially when it's this small. I then fill the cup with more clay so that it will appear to be filled with tasty, creamy coffee. I blend the edges in so that it looks nice and smooth. Not too bad for a first try, I think. I decide to make the second two a bit smaller and more dainty in appearance, although once painted, the bigger one ends up actually being my favourite. Next, to make some cupcakes. I want to give these some really delicious looking butter icing on top. First, to make the cake cup, or I actually don't know what you call those, the little paper things that you cook the muffins in. So I do this the same way as the coffee cups. I use the rim of my glue pot to add texture all around to give a more authentic feel. I really want to buy some molds actually, so I can press clay into it to get textures more easily. I then add a circular piece on top that will be the base of the cake poking out under the butter icing. I then roll out a long piece of clay, tapering off at the end to a point, and coil this around like tubed icing. I then use a little water to help smooth it out a bit, although I think the slightly cracked texture actually works quite well for this soft icing look. I make two of these and you'll see them both when I'm painting. Next, for my big Halloween cake, I press out some clay into 3 discs, 2 for the sponge layer and 1 for the middle butter icing layer. I use slip, which is just very wet clay, to kind of glue the layers together. You can also use PVA glue with air drying clay as well if you want to add extra strength. I then roll out a piece of clay quite thinly. I make sure that it's large enough to cover the top of the cake and fall over the edges. I cut out the butter icing shape I want to put on top. I smooth it out at first with some water, and then add some texture to each surface and slip, and then gently lift it and add it on top, carefully pressing the excess down the sides of the cake like dripping icing. I love how cartoonish it looks. I think it's going to look really fantastic once it's painted. Now for my second cake. It won't be particularly Halloween themed, but I just really felt like making a delicious looking flan. We actually eat flan a lot here in Portugal. At pretty much every special occasion. It's actually called pudim, so it makes sense that we would have it for Halloween too, I think. The technique is basically the same as the last cake. The only difference is the shape of the cake, taller and thinner on top. I cut out what will be the dripping syrup on top and place it gently, folding the clay over the little cake base. I smooth out any bumps with water, and that's our second cake already finished. So I wanted to make little Halloween ornaments to go on top of the cakes maybe. I also might just make them into Halloween biscuits. I haven't quite decided at this stage. Similarly to the cake icing, I just roll out some clay and cut out the shape that I want. First I decide to make a ghost. I use water to smooth out the edges before setting them aside to dry. And next I carve out a little cat face. It's been pretty warm here, much to my dismay honestly, but the good thing about this is that all of these dried really fast, so I could paint them just a few days later. Now to sand down my cakes a bit. I don't mind having a bit of texture, as I find this can add really nicely to the cake effect, but I wanted to make sure the icing looks really lovely and smooth, and then any unsightly bumps are smoothed down completely. Sometimes I use my scalpel to help with this, and I switch between a harsh grain sandpaper and a softer one depending on how bumpy the texture is. Now to paint them all. First for the pumpkins. I want to make them a really vibrant orange with some green running through them and up to the stalks. I've been really enjoying using watercolour paints for colouring my ceramics. I love the soft effect it gives and how using different varnishes can really make the colours stay softer or really pop and become very rich. I start with the butternut squash, layering up the pigment a little at a time, adding more red in some places or more orange or yellow in others. I do the same for the other two pumpkins as well. I then mix two different shades of green for the stalks. I really want to emphasize the twisting shapes by using a darker green. I also bring down some of the green onto the main body of the pumpkin. I really love how this effect turned out. Next for my little bakery ghost. Did you forget about them? Because I almost did. They look so lovely after sanding. I must say I had to do quite a lot of sanding on this Das clay to get them as smooth as I wanted. So I would definitely recommend smoothing this clay out as much as you can while it's still wet. I think that might mean it's quite a bit stronger though, so I think I probably will try using this clay for like my doll hands and things. I want them to remain white, so I just decide to coat them in a nice thick layer of gesso to help seal the clay and also help smooth out their texture a bit. I gently add a little watercolour blush onto their little ghost cheeks. I bought some pigment powder recently and I thought the packs I bought came with red, but it's actually more of a light, almost purplish brown, so I was a bit sad I couldn't add powder blush to them. I think it's okay though. This watercolour effect actually looks really lovely, especially after they're varnished. I'm returning back to this butternut squash as the stalk actually broke off after the first couple of months, so I re-sculpted it recently and now it just needs painting like the others. I'm using some powder orange pigment just to experiment. I want to do my doll's faces using pigment powder rather than paint next time, so I want to get a feel for it. I'm really happy with how well the pigment sticks to the clay. Next, to add all the details to the stalk like my other two pumpkins. Now I'm preparing paints for my cakes. I need to make a nice yellow, slightly orange colour for the sponge layers. At first it looks way too orange, so I water it down a bit and begin adding some more yellow. I was kind of inspired by a Halloween set by Sylvanian Families and wanted to use a similar shade of purple for my cakes. So the colour theme is going to be orange and this kind of lilac purple. I want the icing to look really tasty and smooth, so I do quite a few layers. I actually decided to mix the purple watercolour with white gesso to get more of a soft but solid hue. After a few layers it starts to look really delicious. I decided something felt kind of missing on the cake and thought that some white sparkles painted on the icing could look really lovely. It immediately looked better and I'm so happy I did this. I then begin painting my cupcakes, which will have the same colour scheme. I want one cake to have orange icing and the other one to have purple. I then add the same white sparkles to my purple cupcake. Next is the flan. I accidentally painted it all yellow, but it doesn't really matter as this lovely deep brown will go on top for the syrup. This colour scheme really reminds me of Sanrio's Pom Pom Purin. Now for the coffee cups. I paint the insides a nice rich coffee colour and decide I want the cup to have the same colour scheme of purple and orange. I decided that one will be orange and two will be purple. At first I paint the design as a strip around the cup and let them dry. I then decide I'm not satisfied totally with this design and add these kind of wobbly ghost-esque shapes around the rim, and once I do this I really love how they look. I feel like it also kind of mirrors the dripping icing on the cakes as well. Then for the latte art, I use a tiny paintbrush and a little bit of gesso to add a pumpkin to the orange cup, and then 2 little ghosts for the 2 purple cups. These turned out so delightful, way better than I was expecting. Painting them has really brought them to life. Sometimes when I sculpt things, I almost feel a bit sad to add colour because sometimes they look really nice. Like, I thought the pumpkins looked really nice, even unpainted, but the coffee cups really look so much better now that I've painted them. I think the paint kind of helps you to ignore the slight wonkiness of the cups. It's very hard to get cups to look not wonky when they're this small. Finally, these little decorations, which I've actually decided I do want to be biscuits, as they're actually a bit too big for the cakes really, and I think the cakes look really good without them. I decide on an orange cat, as I love how this colour is really brightening up the Halloween snack party alongside the violet. And now for the fun part, adding the gloss varnish. I did want a little bit of texture variation on the cakes. I wanted the icing to be really shiny in comparison, so I used PVA glue to cover the rest of the cake, as this will look a little bit more matte. Adding the gloss varnish on top is so satisfying. I love how it makes the colours pop and look extra delicious. The pumpkins especially look so much brighter with the gloss finish. It also protects them from the humidity too and helps keep them from breaking if they accidentally fall on the floor. The coffee cups are so tiny, I decide to entirely coat them in the gloss varnish. I also coat the cupcakes entirely in varnish. I use the same technique with the flan, using PVA glue for the cake base and the glossy varnish for the syrup. I also add some glossy varnish for these Halloween biscuits too. I really love how these turned out, they look so tasty. I was a little torn about the ghost. I quite liked the matte texture, but I also thought a shiny, smooth ghost would be really lovely too, and it would also offer extra protection. I began coating them in the varnish and instantly love how their glowing cheeks sparkle under the gloss. Now for something a little unexpected and last minute, I sort of spontaneously decided to make some quick Halloween costumes for a few of my Sylvanians. I don't have much time to do these though, so it's not going to be my best work. I also have a new arrival in the post that I think will be essential for making this Halloween party extra special, and you'll see right at the end. I get to work on the felt witch's hat and dress. The hat was actually really nice and simple, a semicircle sewn into a point, and then the rim of the hat I sew all around the base to connect them. I also embroider a star onto the hat with this silvery thread. I also make a little purple felt ghost costume. It's really simple, just two shapes sewn on top of one another, and a space cut out for their face and paws. I also attempt to make a dress for my Sylvanian that's arriving in the post. I use some purpley kind of fabric for the dress, as I think this will fit the witchy theme really nicely. Working this small is so fiddly. I actually haven't made any proper clothes for my Sylvanians yet. I definitely need more practice making clothes this tiny. Making the skirt pleated was quite a challenge. I learned after doing this, it's better to pleat it first and then sew it onto the top half of the dress rather than trying to do it all at once. Also, I'm sorry, I forgot to film myself sewing the skirt onto the top. I added tiny pieces of lace for the collar too, and this is the dress so far. Are you ready for our Halloween party and to meet our new Sylvanian? Thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun making these, and I haven't tried animation since I was actually a teenager, so I hope you enjoyed it and it wasn't too clunky. Subscribe if you want to watch me make and create all kinds of things. I'm actually an ink illustrator and also a doll maker, so if you enjoyed this, you will probably like seeing me experiment with other mediums too. Take care, happy Halloween, and see you soon.